Welcome back to another episode of Small College Conversations powered by Blue Frame Technologies. My name is Nick Rule. I'm the Director of Athletics at William Penn University and a Business of Small College Athletics board member. Today, I'm really thrilled to be joined by Andy Peterson, the Director of Athletics at Northwest Missouri State, a power NCAA Division II and in the MIAA. Andy and I met at Bosca this year and just had some really good conversations. And Andy, happy to have you here. Thanks for being on. How are things going?
Pretty good. Thanks, Nick, for having me. This is exciting for me. Just like you said, connecting to Bosca, we've never been able to go before. And so Troy Caton, my deputy AD, and I were able to go down and just make some pretty neat connections and grab some ideas from folks that we think we can reciprocate here. So things are going well. Fall's rolling. We've got 5 fall sports compete, championship seasons and they're doing well. 4 of the 5 are ranked in the top 20 from the country. Volleyball and football are both in the top 10. And then our tennis program, their championship season's in the spring, but they have an individual ITA tournament in the fall. And we've got 2 kids that got at-large bids to go on to nationals in Rome, Georgia next weekend. So it's been a fun fall so far. We're doing well, hanging in there. Bearcats are competing. So it's much better than where we were at a year ago.
I know it feels. I mean, I don't think it's normal yet, but there's some sense of kind of what it felt like pre-2020. And, I know you guys are preparing for a big football game tomorrow, and so we're doing things like that. We have fans back and, at higher capacities and such. And it seems like that's been something that's being felt a little bit more across the country. Andy, I'm really interested in, what made you want to be an AD? I mean, you have a different backgrounds and, in college athletics, talk a little bit about your background and, what made you want to serve in the chair of an athletic director?
Sure. My journey was kind of a long one to get to that point, but it happened pretty quickly, if that makes any sense at all. I was an athlete here, played basketball for Coach Steve Tapmeyer and loved it. My experience was fantastic. But I was moving on. I had 3 degrees in agriculture and I had a job with FCS Financial that was what I was going to do. And so when doing my exit interview my senior year, Coach Tapp just kind of brought me in and said he was getting close to retiring and wanted his guys around him. He didn't want to go get a GA from somewhere he didn't know for his last year. So pretty much told me that I was going to come back and be his GA. And I was like, I'd already had a master's in agriculture. It's like, I don't necessarily need that. And he goes, doesn't matter. He goes, you may end up coaching and you'll want that background. So come back, got my master's in PE and GA'd for TAP for that last year. Well, to finish that's a 2-year program. So TAP's last year, then my second year as a GA was Coach McCollum's first year and got into coaching with him, obviously. And just, I fell in love with it immediately with the student athletes. And just, for me, it was, I knew that I was having a positive impact. Well, I didn't know at that time. My experience was so positive because of my coaches, not just Coach Tapp, but the GAs, the assistant coaches, the athletic trainers, strength coaches, all that stuff. So you have a responsibility as a coach, as an administrator, whatever, to positively impact student athlete experience. And we were doing that. We were having a ball. I was coaching with 2 of my best friends, with Coach Mack and Austin Meyer was the assistant coach. We were having a ball. We weren't really good at that point. I think we went 10-16 and 11-15 or something like that those first 2 years. Just didn't was having a ball. And so kind of thought going to go into athletics, ended up at Southwestern Community College for a year in Iowa with Coach Mike Holmes. Bill Krejci's kind of a legend in that area of the woods as the athletic director. They really hired me to coach men's golf is what they needed. They needed a men's golf coach. Mm-hmm. But I met Coach Holmes that summer. I was trying to play overseas still at that point, and Coach Holmes was my summer team coach. He just said, hey, if all this falls through, he goes, I need an assistant coach this fall. So the Europe stuff didn't happen, and so ended up at SWIC. I was coaching men's golf. I was assistant coach for basketball, which is the real purpose why I was there for me personally. And then I was also teaching classes in the ag department, a bunch of I think 3 classes each semester, which was fun. It was awesome, but I was doing a bunch of stuff up there. Had the opportunity just there 1 year, and that next year had the opportunity to come back because we had a part-time basketball position open, and my wife, fiance at the time, Emily, was offered the assistant track and field position full time.
Mm-hmm.
So both of us back at our alma mater. I was doing a bunch of other stuff. I was working at the golf course. I was helping the athletic trainers in the training room. Just wherever, you're young and stupid.
Just do everything.
You do everything. You do whatever you want just to make a quick buck here and there. But also coaching basketball and having a ball doing it. So I did that for a couple of years, and we had a little bit of success. We won the conference tournament, not tournament. We won the conference in 2012, 2013 regular season, and made it to the regional. First time since my senior year, 2008, 2007, 2008. And Coach Mack convinced Coach Churchman at the time that, hey, we really need Andy to be full time just for our program to continue to progress. But we also we had some other holes in the department. So Coach Churchman was able to create an assistant AD for facilities position.
Mm.
And it was truly a means to an end. It was put Andy in this position so that he can coach basketball, right? Like all small school stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so I jumped into that. And I wasn't really thinking about the assistant AD for facility stuff. I mean, I was doing it and loving it, but my passion purpose was coaching basketball and having a direct impact on those, 12, 15 guys, similar to mine. And so I did that for 2 or 3 years. But in those 2 or 3 years was when my world started changing. Because as the assistant AD, I was working with baseball, I was working with football, I was working with women's soccer, women's softball, women's golf. I was working with all these head coaches, and I was, we don't have a huge staff. And so I was helping move the bleachers in Lambkin between basketball practice and track practice. And after track got done, setting up for a volleyball match. And so I'm shoulder to shoulder with all these athletes. My wife's a track coach, so she's got obviously a great relationship with 100+ student athletes. But I just started developing these relationships and these working relationships with coaches and with staff and with athletes. And so it just really kind of the shift. And 2015, we had our women's golf coach resigned, and it's a part-time position. Wasn't great at the time, but once again, you're young and kidless at the time. Mm-hmm. And so it's like, hey, it ain't that big a deal. Emily had track on Friday, Saturday. I would leave for golf on Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. Mm-hmm. The golf season kind of ended October 15th when men's basketball season started, and then men's basketball would end first week of March and golf would start. So
it's actually a pretty
it all worked, but it was kind of crazy. But it was just one of those, he retired and we couldn't get anybody to take the job. It was a $10,000 stipend position, that really deserves a full-time attention. And so I just, in talking with Coach Churchman, I was like, I think I can do it. I coach golf at Swick. I can build my own program, have my own influence on culture and all that stuff. And so I was excited and took that. But once again, it all just came back to that student athlete experience. What better way to have an impact on student athlete experience than being a coach, but also an administrator where, you've got a direct impact on every student athlete in the department. So
yeah, I think it's interesting. I mean, you kind of talk about the evolution of it, and like you were there, your purpose was basketball coaching and all that. And then, as soon as you were exposed to, other programs and saw that, oh my gosh, they have a good thing going in here too. It's like, oh, exactly. I want to be a part of that. And I think one of the things transitioning from coaching to being an administrator is that sometimes we get so focused in our own program. And I talk about this a lot, like how do we get 25 umbrellas to work under one umbrella, right? And still have their own individuality. And it sounds like that's something you noticed all that. It's like, okay, well, maybe I can make an impact as a whole, bringing like the good stuff that we've done with basketball and like get everyone working together, but still being their own individual. And I think, having that perspective, it sounds like there was an aha moment when you were, overseeing facilities as assistant AD and just like, oh, I'm with the baseball. Okay. Like there's more going on. Yeah.
Yeah. And just that impact and those relationships with student athletes, it was profound. But, I think the other thing for me too was we had a lot of programs, like you said, we've got 16 sports. We got 10 head coaches, right? Each one of those 10 head coaches has their own personality. They got their own way of doing things, all this stuff. But I just noticed there were so many similarities amongst these programs, but they weren't codified. They weren't streamlined. They weren't efficient in terms of the football coach is doing the exact same thing that the women's soccer coach is doing.
Yeah.
But you're not speaking the same language. So your athletes are on different pages. And then that that affects, your strength conditioning coaches and your compliance office and your athletic trainer. And so how do we start closing those gaps and getting everybody, to the same at the
Yeah.
same page? And at that point, football was on an absolute tear. They still are.
Mm-hmm.
They've got a recipe for. We're in Maryville, Missouri. It's a small community, but they have a unbelievable track record recruiting small town kids from Southwest Iowa, Southeast Nebraska, Northeast Kansas, Northwest Missouri, and having an unbelievable program. And how's that any different, or it shouldn't really be any different for the other sports? It was just a philosophy and something that we had to work on codifying and propagating in these other sports. So for me, it was 2017 we won the men's basketball national title, and I felt like to be an athletic director, I needed to get my doctorate.
Mm-hmm.
And so I stepped away from coaching to focus on that. And while I was in that program was when I was offered the AD job, and here I am. So if you want to finish my dissertation paper for me, Nick, I'll gladly appreciate it.
Hey, I got to get started. That's one of my goals. And so I may be reaching out to you for some help on, when things are going crazy.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Another thing you touched on as you were talking through that seemed to resonate here is just like, I think sometimes, up and comers in the industry, they want to get so specialized and focused early on. And one of the things that you said really made a lot of sense. And is that, you got yourself involved in everything. And he's like, just young and, dumb through the whole thing. But in the same respect, like, right, in order to prove yourself, especially if you want to, be fast tracked a little bit, like, I think you and I kind of share that a little bit. We probably got involved a little bit younger than a lot, some others in what the industry really says. But you just kind of got to say, yeah, hey, yes, I'll do it. Yes, I'll do it. Yes, I'll do it. To prove yourself. And so, I mean, that sounds like something that you did and you took to heart. It's just like, hey, I may not be making a whole lot on this, but in the end, that payday will come. I just need to show that I can buy into the big picture.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And just the thought of, at that, it's like being a graduate assistant,
Mm-hmm.
20 hours a week. Well, you hit 20 hours in athletics, you hit 20 hours a week, Tuesday at noon. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
But as a grad assistant, you didn't care. I mean, you didn't care. It was, hey, I'm going to watch film. I've got, Coach Tatmeyer, who'd won, however many hundreds of games. You got Coach Mack, who's now probably one of the best basketball coaches in the country. You had Coach Churchma, who's a legend. Coach Dorrell, who's a Division I coach now. I mean, you had Coach Bostwick, who was the defense coordinator for 17 years. There were so many coaches up. Coach Rosewell's our tennis coach. He's got over 1,100 wins, close to 1,200 wins now. I mean, he's a legend. And so, you got all these coaches to learn from and pick from, and you're going to do that. And so you just try to be a sponge. And, there's a difference between saying, yes, I'm going to do that, or yes, I'm going to help you, and being a yes man. I mean, there were a lot of times when you had to say, no, we can't do that.
Yeah.
Or, here's how we're going to, but it was just problem solving and troubleshooting, being a Swiss Army knife. Austin Meyer, as our head women's coach now, he was the assistant coach at the time on the men's side. He used to joke around with me that, Andy never gets anything done because he's always doing something. And it was funny, but it's kind of true. Like I never actually kind of got all the way through something before I was starting something else. So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, athletics is a lifestyle for sure. Obviously my wife being a track coach, she understands it as well, which made the transition so much easier for me too, because she understood, hey, Saturday are football game days, and Fridays we got soccer, volleyball, and Sundays probably a soccer match, and it's a little more laid back. But, I'm going to go to the national track meets to support student athletes, and I'm going to go to our away football games and volleyball conference tournaments and that sort of stuff. So it is a lifestyle for sure. And it's something that if you don't have a passion for it, it doesn't really matter what your salary is. It's going to be rewarding at the end.
Absolutely. Yeah. You touched on, Maryville and Northwest Missouri State and all that. And I shared with you before we were on here, it's just like in the West and, small college athletic departments really look to you guys and your community relationship because it just seems so strong. It's created that over the years. What do you think is the recipe for success for, that community, that small community and your small college that has a strong relationship?
I think we've been here so long. So part of it is natural, in a small college town. We're kind of a microcosm of what you would see um, at the big Power Five level. But really, most of those schools, most of those institutions that do really, really, really well, they're in a college town. Texas at Austin. The ones that are easy to name: Gainesville in Florida. Mizzou's at Columbia, Iowa City with Iowa. You just go around Manhattan, Kansas, Lawrence, Kansas. They're not in big metropolis cities where there's other things going on.
Mm-hmm.
We don't compete against the Chiefs on Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
We do, but we don't because our fan base is just a different clientele to a certain extent. So, but everything is reciprocated, right?
Mm-hmm.
When we have a football game and there's 8,000 people that come to Bearcat Stadium, we've doubled the size of Maryville for that weekend. So the restaurants are full, the hotels are full, all that stuff passes through, and the community can get behind that. So they like to shut down and everything is green at the same time. It's a little bit like in Nebraska. I think I've heard that when Nebraska Lincoln has a football game, Memorial Stadium is the third most populated city in the state during home football games behind Omaha and Lincoln. So it's people come from all over just to watch it. And I feel like we're kind of the same. The 14 county area in Northwest Missouri that we represent, when we've got a home game, home weekend stuff, it's full, and people support it. So it is reciprocal. We've got to give that love to people and be respectful of what we do in terms of the small mom and pop shops that are in town, whatever businesses those are, because they're going to return that love and advertise for us and brand with us and that sort of thing. So it's a back and forth. Obviously, everything we do, we try to schedule around what goes on in the school.
Mm-hmm.
We try to schedule around the high school stuff because there's one high school in town, so everybody's a Maryville High fan.
Mm-hmm.
So we try not to compete with Maryville High football and Maryville High basketball and those sort of things. And just be a good partner. If you're a partner, then you reap what you sow a little bit. And we've obviously been real fortunate with football since 1994 plus that we've had a lot of extra games here. We've had a lot of playoff games, and those playoff games are full restaurants, full hotels, full traffic and that sort of thing. And so the community does support it and get behind it. And obviously winning helps too. Everybody likes to support a winner, and it does help. But I really think it started long before that. I think it just started with people understanding. We're probably the second or third highest employer in town too. We've got a Kawasaki plant, and then there's a couple of other companies here. But I think we're probably maybe two or three in terms of employment. So there's a lot of people that work and live in Northwest Missouri State. So
yeah, absolutely. No. And I think, you talk a little bit about, as you're saying, full hotels, full restaurants, now the economic impact, right? And if you can talk about that and how it benefits your community, having, athletic events. And I mean, obviously that's a win-win. And anytime you're helping people's businesses, obviously they're going to want to jump on board more too. It's that, like you said, that reciprocal relationship. So no, that makes a lot of sense. Andy, one of the things that we talked about before, and I was kind of sharing with you, I was just like, gosh, I couldn't, when I first looked you up, it was probably a few years ago. It's like, he's an AD, but he's also the women's golf coach, and as a prior women's golf coach, you and I probably played at the same tournament at some point along the line. But in small college athletics, we wear so many multiple different hats, and you just never know what that hat is going to be. But I think the coach and administrator hat is interesting, right? Because we both know that it's just like when you go from an assistant coach to a head coach, it's different. So when you go from a coach to an administrator, it's different. And so there's different mentalities that take place there. So, how do you balance that? How do you balance, like, you're a coach, you coach the women's golf team, but you're also an athletic director, and you have to make the decisions that are what's best for Northwest Missouri State. And sometimes those might conflict with what a coach is thinking is the best decision. So how do you balance wearing those two different hats, and maybe what is some advice that you could give for others that are doing the same thing?
Yeah, I mean, it is difficult. I think the part that doesn't sit well with me the most is the attention that the young women in my program don't get because I am the AD.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a lot of meetings. I mean, there's a lot of practices that I don't go to, and my GA runs practices.
Mm-hmm.
I think we've had 5 tournaments this fall. I've been to 2 of them.
Mm-hmm.
The other three, I didn't go. So they're kind of competing on their own. But at the same time, I'm obviously completely open and upfront with all of our recruits when they come on campus, so that they understand, hey, I'm the AD. I got a lot of other responsibilities that pull me away from golf, but I'm here to support you. I'm here to make sure you get your degree and get out of here. If you're playing golf at Northwest Missouri State, you're probably not going to go to the LPGA.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to be a professional teacher or accountant or whatever outside of that. And so just making sure that you've got those expectations met, to try not to, or expectations laid, so that they're not completely blindsided by what happens when they get here. I think that's probably the most important piece of advice, is them understanding that I'm not going to be there 24/7. I'm not, the women's basketball or women's soccer or whatever, where that's my entire, 60-hour week is women's golf. It's not.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that the power in it for me is I have that direct connection with student athletes.
Yeah.
And the student athlete vibe, not just with golf,
Mm-hmm.
but on a campus of 4,000 people, 4,500 people, on ground in person. Those 8 young ladies have connections with a lot of different athletes. They got connections with campus in general, with what's going on in the dorms, with what's going on in the cafeteria. So there's a direct line there that's not filtered in any way. I can get a lot of reports from coaches that are filtered from their athletes, from what they're seeing on campus. Not because the coach is trying to do it on purpose, just because they're not a student. They're not, so it gets filtered naturally. So having that direct connection, I think, is beyond powerful. I think for me, it helps me relationally with the other coaches.
Yeah.
Because I can look at them and say, I'm talking to you as the women's golf coach right now.
Yeah.
And just say, this is what this initiative or this change or this budgeting model or whatever else, I'm living it too. I understand. I'm not asking you to do something that I'm not going to do, because I have to do it too, because I'm the women's golf coach, So I do think so that's probably the 2 biggest pieces of advice, but also just things to think about.
Yeah.
The other thing that I've caught myself doing more recently, because I've been the golf coach for 8 years now,
Mm-hmm.
what I've caught myself doing recently, probably since becoming AD 3 years ago, is as an AD, you really kind of got the long-term view in your head, right?
Yeah.
Coaches typically don't. Coaches, it's about this year. This is the team I got. Now, every now and then they'll put up on the board their depth chart or their classes, and I've got 3 seniors, 2 juniors, and 4 sophomores or something like that, right? And so they think about, okay, the recruiting classes, they're looking in the future. But when it comes to competing, they're looking right now.
Mm-hmm.
As the AD, sometimes you don't looking at that. Sometimes you're looking, are we getting better? I'm looking at the last 3 years and comparing that, and looking at the roster and the coaching staff. And so there's a more of a long-term view to it. And I've caught myself the last, I don't know, maybe since COVID hit,
Mm-hmm.
just having a more longer term viewpoint of golf.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if I've been completely upfront with the women in the program about the here and now, like living in the present, making sure that I'm respecting Morgan Teal, who's a 5th-year senior.
Yeah.
She's not worried about the long-term, impacts that she is, as a culture person, but she wants to compete now. This is her senior year. We want to have the best year we've ever had now. And so there is a mindset, mind framing that needs to take place when you're jumping back and forth from administrator to coach, to make sure you're respecting and you are valuing those seniors who this is their last year competition. Recruiting is one thing. You're always recruiting for the future, but just in the other decisions you make about travel schedule, where we're going, get the right gear, all that other stuff. It's easy for me to think, I'll get new golf bags next year because, we're going to get through that. Well, did I really think about my seniors and their experience as they leave here? Because you want every one of those senior classes to leave on good terms.
On good terms. Yeah, no, that's a really good way of framing it. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
We deal with so many weird things in this job, right? I mean, there's even this year, there's just been some weird things that have happened. Like, I can't believe that happened. But what's maybe the weirdest thing that has happened to you on the job that you had to deal with, and what was that?
The weirdest thing, that's a tough question. I don't know. I think, like you said, we're the small college athletics. You're not afraid to do anything. I get into a lot of trouble. Um, I consider myself a servant leader. I grew up on a small family dairy farm in north central Missouri, and I've always just kind of been, um, I'll say well-rounded. I'm not afraid to fix stuff. I'm not afraid of, electricity and figuring out, wiring and whatever, construct, whatever. All hands on deck, right? A Swiss Army knife. And so, I've gotten into a lot of trouble in the past about, as the AD, you feel like you should focus on the $1 million jobs or the $10,000 jobs, not the $2 job.
Yeah.
Not not picking up trash or straightening chairs or stuff like that. But I don't know. That's a tough question. What's the weirdest thing that's ever happened? I'll have to think about that one, Nick.
Yeah, I remember, and the question came up, and sometimes I remember being at another institution at a basketball game, and kind of went up there just to help us administer, game day administration, because we were expecting a good crowd on both sides. And remember this athletic director, it was actually Troy Plummer from Grandview. I see him, and he and I have gotten to be friends and all that. We're in the same conference. I see him running up to the corner of the bleachers, and some fan side, and I go up to him. He's got gloves on and everything. I went up to him, I'm like, Troy, what are you doing? He's like, I'm cleaning up puke.
Yeah.
And he's like, and that's just what we do as small college athletic director. I mean, when you're a small college AD,
yeah.
I'm cleaning up puke, and I'm like, that's disgusting. But I'm like, that's a weird thing that, those in the D1 space wouldn't probably understand.
So we're at Bosca this summer. Like I said, it's the first time I've ever been.
Yeah.
And I'm listening to Jim Abbott talk, and he's talking about the history of Bosca and how he created it, because going to NACDA or going to NCAA convention or whatever, and you're listening to the AD at Ohio State, the AD at Florida, the AD at Rutgers, whatever. He goes, I quickly realized that these guys are in a different atmosphere. He goes, because they're not worried about running out of popcorn on Thursday night.
Yeah.
Right. And so the funny thing, why that struck me was, and this may be the weird thing, we rented out our football stadium this summer for an 8-man football all-star game, Northwest Missouri 8-man all-star game. We rented it out, and they were a great group. They handled everything themselves. Really, all they needed was somebody to run the concession stand. That was the only thing that they felt like they couldn't cover, and they wanted to use our facility to do that too. And so when it boiled down to it, I thought, I'm not going to it was the middle of the summer, number one. So we didn't really have any student labor. And I wasn't going to ask any of my staff to come in and do that for 3 hours on a Friday, or I think it was a Saturday night, actually. Mm-hmm. So I ran a concession stand. And it was one of those deals where I didn't think it through, right? Yeah. So I opened the concession stand an hour and a half before the game, and people were coming up, and I forgot to get a money bag. So I had no change at all. I think I had a 10 and like 3 ones in my wallet. So I just thought, okay. So I wrote down a little note that I had $13, and so I had a 10 and 3 ones. And so the first 8 or 9 people that showed up, and they were paying me, they wanted to pay with 20s or 10s or whatever. And I was asking them for change. I was asking them for, and this is the AD of the institution. Yep. They're just completely ill prepped for what was going on. And I had high school prospective students at Northwest Missouri State. This is their big crescendo of their athletic experience. Their high school seniors getting ready to go to college, and parents and whatever, and little brothers and sisters. May have been their first time on college campus, and they come to the concession stand, and here's some weirdo. He's got no change. He didn't know where anything was at. It went really, really well, but man, the first 25 minutes, it was just I was bartering. I was using all of my people skills I had. And so there's some little lady, she bought, I forget how much stuff, but it was like 12. She gave me 12 ones. Uh-huh. And I will forever remember her face, just like, you were an absolute angel. Like, God sent you here for me this evening. So that awesome. may be one. It wasn't necessarily weird. It's just one of those things you don't think about. Rented out the facility, made some revenues from renting the facility out in the middle of the summer, which doesn't usually happen for football anyway.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, concession stand, I'll do it. How hard can that be? And just was not prepared at all.
That's a
So
great story. I love that. Yeah. I could totally see you just like bartering with,
yeah,
the parents and stuff. Hey, you got a 10 there, but I mean, do you have 5 1s? Like,
yeah. Do you have a 5 and 5 1s maybe
yeah,
by chance?
yeah,
Yeah, I
yeah,
think part of the story was, people know who I am,
yeah,
and they're coming to the game like, what are you doing?
yeah,
Like, why are you back there?
yeah.
It's like, do you want to water the Skittles or water the Snickers? What are you after? And it was just kind of funny to some of the reactions you got from people like, what are you doing, Andy?
Hmm.
Well, helping out 8-man football this weekend. So
That's great. That's a great story. Yeah, that's awesome. Let's talk about, just as we kind of come to a close here, final few questions. What's the most proud achievement in your profession or your time in college athletics that you wouldn't read in a headline? We get a lot of headlines in college athletics. Championships, all those things. I see NCAA championship, trophies behind you. And what is a headline that, or something you're proud of that wouldn't be in a headline?
oh man, that's tough. Um, I think just in my history, maybe it's more as a coach than an administrator, but just the number of student athletes that when they come back, they're just excited to see you.
Yeah.
It's not, or you get the wedding invitations in the mail, or you get,
Yeah.
the random note on Facebook about, hey, remember the time when I hurt my knee or whatever, and you came through the training room and showed me your scar from your ACL. Just those are the kind of things that um, you don't appreciate or understand the impact you have on lives. Not necessarily student athlete experience, but just lives in general.
Yeah.
We had a young man on the basketball program from downtown Detroit. I mean, he came from absolutely nothing.
Mm-hmm.
He's been playing overseas since he graduated in 2013, 2014, something like that. Um, has done very well for himself. But it was one of those, we just felt like if we didn't keep him here over Christmas break, he wouldn't come back. He wouldn't have came back. It was one of those kind of deals. And my thing was, the assistant coach was always told the guys before the game,
Mm-hmm.
I'd go in the locker room, make sure everybody's got their shoes on, they're not getting dressed right when coach comes in, do the pregame talk, whatever. So I was like, hey, everybody set? Everybody's like, oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I was like, and I'd look at all of them and just kind of randomly just say, I love you guys. One way or another, I love you guys. We're gonna hoop it up here today, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it just kind of morphed slowly into just me just saying, I didn't try to then rationalize why I said it. I would just come in and say,
Yeah.
here we go, guys, ready? Love you guys. And I'd walk out. Well, then it started progressing to where they would reply back.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget when D'Angelo Haley said it back to me. I was just like, hey, I love you guys. Like, love you too, coach. It was just so
Yeah.
like we connected, and he knew that, yeah, we brought him here to be a basketball player, right? And to coach basketball, but we cared about him as a human.
Mm-hmm.
He understood that, he understood that on a deeper level, on a personal level. And so that's the thing. You just never know who you're going to have a connection with. It's a lot of times it's not necessarily even a student athlete in your sport.
Yeah.
You reach out to, a women's soccer player who's struggling or goes through a health issue, and you connect with her and her mom because you were there, you went to the hospital to check on them. And, you have lasting impacts on people through things that you don't even think about doing. You just do them because you feel like it's part of the gig.
Yeah. Yeah. And those little small things, you just never know how much of an impact that might make on someone.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
we do those things because, just wired to do them, but it's also a sign that that's really not normal in our world for people to do little small things, and we forget about that. So no, that's a great answer, great perspective on that. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm sure a lot of people, as they listen to this, will be nodding their head saying, yeah, totally, and will be able to reflect on their own experience with someone like that. As we close here, Andy, what's the best piece of advice you've received, and or what's the best advice that you give others? It could be one of the same, but best piece of advice you received.
It's cliche, but it's so true about you have to be yourself. You cannot try to be your predecessor. Um, we've had a ton of success here over 20 years, right? The last 25 years. We've had two complete rollovers of the football staff. The men's basketball staff's completely new. I think we've, with the exception of baseball, Coach Lowe's been here 20 years. Rosie's been here almost 40 with tennis. Other than that, I think we've completely turned over. We've almost, with the exception of Lori Hopkins as our deputy AD, SWA, I've hired a completely new staff. My support staff's all completely new. You have to be yourself. You can't rely on, well, I'm coming into this job at Northwest Missouri State. And Coach Churchman was the football coach here for 17 years that turned them into a monster. And then he was gone for 3 years. And then he came back as the AD. Mm-hmm. He's got so many different relationships and so many different experiences to rely on, and how he does things is completely different than the way I was wired, right? Mm-hmm. And when he retired from coaching and Coach Bostock took over, Coach Bostock was more than comfortable in his own skin. Mm-hmm. He passed away tragically that next summer and didn't even get to coach. Then we hired Coach Dorrell. Well, Coach Dorrell is a complete goofball. Coach T was very polished and always, very well dressed. Dorrell didn't care. Dorrell was a townie. He grew up in Maryville. I think he was an All-American lineman in 1997, but did some other stuff. He's a goofball. He wore bright neon green shorts. Because he exercised all the time, worked out, tried to stay fit. He didn't care what he looked like. It was, hey, this is me. This is me. This is who you get. Now, he coached the heck out of a football team, obviously, 3 national titles in 6 years and stuff. Coach Tapmeyer was fire and brimstone, get after your butt, kind of from the Bobby Knight school of coaching, right? Mm-hmm. I loved him. I would run through any wall to this day for that guy. Coach Mack came through the same system to a certain extent. And, for the first couple of years, I kind of think we kind of tried to be like Coach Tapp. We were not Coach Tapp, And so I don't think it's any different. You've got to be, if you're not comfortable in your own skin trying to do what you're doing, you're not going to be successful. Because I believe truly student athletes, especially student athletes in today's world, they can see right through that.
Yes.
If you're not being your true self and being transparent, they're going to see right through it, and they're not going to respond to you. They're not going to, necessarily respect you for what you're trying to do. You see it all the time with coaches across the country. They put on a big persona because they feel like, hey, I'm the athletic director at Northwest Missouri State, so I've got to live to this standard all the time. Well, you make the standard by who you are and how you live and how you treat people, right? Mm-hmm. It's not the same standard it can't be the same standard for every person, because every person's got a different set of backgrounds, beliefs, experiences that makes them who they are. So you can, as long as you're focused on your people mm-hmm. and your student athletes, that's what's going to maintain your culture. But the standards and stuff is going to change. But you have to be yourself. Like I said, I love the little stuff. I love sweeping the floor. I love picking up trash. Mm-hmm. I love running the concession stand. I love doing the little stuff, because I just feel like growing up on the farm, my dad would never ask us to do something if he wasn't willing to do it himself. Mm-hmm. And that's how I feel. I'm not a very good delegator. I'm not. I need to be better at it in certain areas, but I'm not very good at it. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I hope my team would know that if Andy asks me to do something, it's because he needs my help and wants me to do this, or they're the expert in whatever. I'm not going to do media stories and stuff. That's Colin's area. Yeah. Right. But if I'm asking him to do something completely different, he knows it's coming from a place where I need it. Or, it's not that I demand it or I expect it or anything like that. So, whereas Coach T came from a football structure of, he was the head coach, and he delegated to his offensive coordinator, he delegated to his defensive coordinator, and so everything was delegation. And I lived in that world. He delegated a lot of stuff to me facilities wise. It was awesome. It was a very healthy positive experience for me as an assistant AD under Coach Churchman.
Mm-hmm.
That's not how I operate. I can't operate that way. It would be so foreign to me and unrealistic. So you've got to find what's comfortable for you and your own skin, and just and keep moving forward. Obviously, you got to learn from the past, but you also can't change it. So.
Yeah, I mean, that's the art of self-leadership, right? If you're not sure who you are as a leader, people are going to recognize that. And I love what you said about student athletes. We'll see right through that, especially today's student athlete. Yeah, I'm sitting here nodding my head, absolutely. And I think more and more coaches can see through that probably better than they've ever been able to see through it before too. And
absolutely.
So you got to be real. That's a great piece of advice to end on. Andy, hey, I appreciate your time here today on the Small College Conversations podcast, the part of the business of small college athletics. It was great to see you at Bosca this year. I hope to see you again next year. And, I know you and I talked about bringing our athletic operations team down maybe sometime to kind of see how you guys do things and to learn from all of you. So hope maybe I'll be able to bring our team down and catch a basketball game and see how you guys operate. But again, thanks again for your time. And again, remember, folks, Small College Conversations is powered by Blue Frame Technologies. Andy Peterson, the AD at Northwest Missouri State. Thanks again, man.
Thanks, Nick. Appreciate you, dude.